Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for a new series. This is called History S01. Today is Tuesday, March 19th, 2019, and this is the very first episode, Episode 1, U.S. Constitution. So, we'll get started here, but before we get started, let me just put up this little disclaimer here. Now, I'm not an expert on the Constitution or anything like that. I'm just a citizen of the U.S. who lives here and feels it's worthwhile understanding the supreme law of the land. Okay, so let me just put up a picture here of the Constitution. And you can see what it looks like there. I think it was actually written onto 4 pages. So this is the first page. And you can see it's very famous. That's at the top there. Begins, "We the people." And it was written on parchment in pen and ink. And parchment, I believe, is like sheepskin that's been dried and stretched. And I used to use it for writing back in the old days. And the kind of pens they had there were quill pens or feather pens. And you take say a pen, like a feather from a goose, and then you take a penknife and you'd cut it so that it would hold, you cut the end of it so that it would hold ink, and that you would write with that. And you can see here's like the second page here. So it's all written in this script that's from the 18th century. And I'm going to tell you something, it was written as in this form, it was script form. You might have a hard time making out the words sometimes. And it's also written as a legal document, right, as using 18th century language. So, legal documents are hard to read always. They call it legalese. They have to be very precise, so they end up being very ponderous, and the sentence is very long. And when you combine with the fact that it's written in the 18th century, back in the 18th century, people wrote a lot different than they do today. They spoke a lot different. Have you ever read any novels from the 19th century, like maybe Herman Melville, Moby Dick, or Nathaniel Hawthorne? You know that they were very literate back then. They wrote very long sentences. Sometimes you'd have to get through a lot of different subclauses and everything before you finally got to the end of a sentence, and you have to remember what the sentence was even about from the beginning. So, in my opinion, it might be difficult for a modern reader to if you start reading it from straight through from the beginning to the end, you might have a tough time getting through it. So what I decided to do is, in order to solve this problem of getting through the Constitution, is divide and conquer. That's a good way to deal with things. So what I've done is I've divided the Constitution into 10 small parts, 10 pieces. And we can just try to consume a little bit at a time. In fact, we'll further subdivide it if necessary. Some parts might be bigger than others, and we'll just divide those into further subparts. So, but anyway, what I came up with here is 7 parts are the Preamble, 7 articles, and you can see here, this is a document. The Preamble is the thing at the top there, that paragraph at the top. And the 7 articles, you can see Article 1, Article 2, here's Article 3 and 4, and Article 5, 6, and 7. And then the last parts we have are the signatories, which is where we sign it. You see down at the bottom all the signatures. And finally, the amendments. And that's how we're going to divide it. We're going to just approach it a little bit at a time, and then try to see if we could just understand how the thing is, how it's written. So anyway, let me just show you the actual 10 parts I've come up with here. So there's the Constitution of the United States and 10 sections I'm going to talk about. And by the way, the numbering I came up with, 1 through 10, that's my numbering. That's not in the Constitution. And in fact, there's other things not in the Constitution. There's no title or anything. It doesn't say at the top, like if you look at this document here, it doesn't say the Constitution of the United States of America on the very top line. Furthermore, like the articles, even though I have people give them titles, like Article 1 is the legislative branch, you will not see, it doesn't say that in the actual document. It's just the words that describe it. So anyway, we'll just go over the 10 sections here, and then well, the very first one is the preamble. And in very simple terms, it just says, it answers the questions what, who, and why. What are they doing, who's doing it, and why are they doing it? And we'll get into the details of that later, but that's really what the preamble does. It just gives a what, who, and a why. Then the next 7 things are the 7 articles. And this is really the meat of the Constitution. This is where all the everything happens. In fact, the very first articles, the first 3 articles, 1, 2, and 3, are the most important ones. You can see the first one, people call it the legislative branch. Article 2 is the executive branch, and Article 3 is the judicial branch. And again, I have to stress that that's not actually, those words aren't the titles of the articles in the document itself. So it's just people use that afterwards to, as shorthand, to say Article 1 is the legislative branch. And of course, the legislative branch is the people who make laws. Right? Legislature means laws, and that would be the Congress who writes the laws. Article 2, the executive branch, is the people who execute those laws, and of course that's going to be the president and the vice president and his cabinet and all the departments, like the Department of Defense and the Department of Agriculture and Department of the Interior and all that stuff. And the third article is the executive branch. That's the third branch of government. I mean the judicial branch. And that's going to be the judges in the court system. And you can see what they've done in these first articles. They call it separation of powers. They've apportioned the stuff to each branch of government. The legislature has some job to do, the executive has a job to do, and the judicial has a job to do. Now, the fourth article is the states, and they also gave some requirements and some rights for the states, and that's covered in Article 4. And Article 5 is called amendment, and basically the framers of the Constitution, they decided that in the future they might want to make some changes to it. People coming along might change things, and the way you do it is by amending it. And an amendment is essentially something that you tack on at the end, and that's where that's how you make the changes. You can either add new stuff, or you can even nullify or delete old stuff with an amendment. And what this Article 5 does, it actually gives the process how you amend the Constitution. Now, Article 6 covers 3 separate things: debts, supremacy, and oaths. And we'll get into those later, but that's kind of a short one also, just those 3 things. Article 7 is ratification. And if you think about this, when the Constitution was first written, it was just words on parchment. And it didn't have any force of law or anything to it. People all had to agree that that's what they wanted, and that was what the ratification was. Ratification was where all the states had to go and decide that they were going to abide by this Constitution and accept it. Section 9 here, or not Section 9, it's the Part 9 I broke it into, is the signatories. And this essentially just has a statement, has the date, has the signatures of all the people who signed it, and it's attested by the secretary. And attested just means that it was confirmed to be true and real and everything by the secretary. And the last part I'm going to talk about is the amendments. And I've broken it into 2 groups of amendments. There's actually 27 amendments. There's the first 1 through 10. People call it the Bill of Rights. And the second group, I'm calling 11 through 27, I'm calling it changes and additions. Those are things they added afterwards. So anyway, we're going to get into those parts at a later time in further videos. And that's basically what I want to cover for today. And I just want to mention here that this book I showed here at the beginning, this is a pocket book that you can fit in your hip pocket. It's got the complete text of the Constitution in it. It also has an interpretation in kind of more readable English. It's not so legalistic, and a modern reader can understand. This is actually intended for like high school kids, or even bright younger ones for middle school. So anyway, thanks for watching.